You may have heard that the next Lord Pack DLC for Total War Warhammer 2 will feature the Wood Elves, and if that's a surprise to you, welcome to the club. Most everyone I spoke to was expecting Dwarfs and Skaven, but Wood Elves and Ratmen works just as well, and in this video I'm going to go over what lords I think will feature in this new DLC, what units they'll likely bring, and see if I can't predict the mechanics for you even, because it's always fun to theorycraft a potential DLC. Let's take a look at what I'm calling the Mutant and the Maidens. It makes sense to start with the Wood Elves since they're the confirmed half of the DLC, but with this DLC chart, we have even more clues to find out who they'll pick. And the lord that's almost certainly the accompanying Wood Elf Free LC lord is Ariel, Queen of Athel, Loren. Ariel is by far one of the most well-known Wood Elves. Even though Ariel hasn't been a true lord choice since the 4th edition book, she is a fan favorite, and also fills the niche of a caster lord that is currently missing. This second lord has already been referred to as she, and including her in this way would rectify not having added her in the Wood Elf race pack to begin with back in Game 1. There's also semi-lore reasons why she would never leave Athel Loren and would need to be in a Mortal Empires only campaign. See, Ariel has the magical forces of nature flowing through her as if she were the goddess Isha herself. It can even shift into a sylph-like war aspect form, similar to Malice Darkblade's transformation in-game. Here though, it doubles her height and unfolds huge moth wings with shimmering iridescent scales, and even allows her to fly, which is a trick that no other legendary lord can currently manage at the moment, and I'd love to see that put into the game. Think about a elf queen shifting forms like that scene from Lord of the Rings with Galadriel, who she is most definitely based on. Her likely abilities are a divine aura, where everyone gets nearby magical defense, and a unique weapon, the Wand of Witch Elm, which will likely reduce the Winds of Magic cost of any of her spells and increase the reserves. Her berry wine can heal herself or targets, and the Dart of Doom, originally a twig broken from the Tree of Woe, is likely to be a single target spell that does huge damage. Including Ariel would also make an easy and obvious way to expand into the new spell lores, since traditionally Wood Elves could also wield high and dark magic, which should be added with this new DLC and its patch. And this duality of light and dark is something Ariel has struggled with in the past, and would make for a really neat dual branch on her skills tree, focusing on life versus destruction. There's also a possibility we'll see the lore of Athel Loren, which only appeared in the 6th edition Wood Elf book, which allowed you to summon and move forests, buff friendly units while they're in forests, heal them, and cause a bunch of fear and give ward saves. It was never particularly effective, but since Clan Eshin got their own lore of magic, there's no reason the Wood Elves can't either. Mainly though, including Ariel means Wood Elves would also have access to generic female caster generals in the form of spellweavers. But since Ariel is likely to be the free LC, and that is now sorted, who will be the paid Wood Elf Lord? Well, your current fan favorite choice, and the one everyone's asking for, is the Sisters of Twilight, Naestra and Arahan. These twins represent the light and the darkness of the Wood Elves themselves, and are mysteriously linked so that while one lives, the other cannot die. Nobody knows where they come from, and it's actually possible they're just detached pieces of the Wood Elf Queen's psyche, having plucked her most extreme emotions from herself and literally given them life. But besides looking very yin and yang with their hair color and personalities, the sisters also get attack bonuses that reflect the dichotomy of their nature, with one gaining bonuses against order and the other against chaos. Even their unique weapons you unlock double down on this, with one sister firing a bow that does armor-piercing flaming attacks that also heal you, while the other shoots multiple poisoned armor-piercing arrows at the same time. They also come with 2 unique mounts, something that CA really seems to like for their DLC lords, Gwendolor, an awesome descendant of the King of Eagles, and Cathan Har, a forest dragon. Now, a CA rep has previously stated that bringing the Sisters of Twilight into the game would be, frankly, too difficult for their current system. But they also once said there would be no DLC for DLC, and here we are talking about it. Skarsnik and Gobla proved that a unit composed of 2 models is possible, and besides a unique way of sitting on their mounts, everything else actually is pretty feasible in the game, with the 2 bow shots being represented as 2 different spells, and 2 unique skill lines, one dedicated to each of the sisters. As far as likelihood goes though, I score them a Nakai the Wanderer. Cool lord, mass appeal, but hard to implement properly. The other Wood Elf 8th edition lord to consider is Sir Generic, Araloth the Bold, a Wood Elf Glade Lord who porked the Lady of the Lake and became one of their greatest champions. He comes with a hawk friend called Skarn the Eye Thief and combines together a couple 4th edition lords into one character. Oh, and he killed Morgor the Shadowgave one time. So, points for that. If he's in the game, he would focus on forest stalking, ambushing, and generally making Wood Elves unbreakable pointy stick shooting nightmares. Glade Lords already exist in the game though, so it's not like he'd be that hard to implement. Just add some gold paint and throw on some extra antlers. And including him would almost guarantee the new hero character that accompanies these DLCs would probably be the missing Glade Captain melee hero. But if I had to rate his likelihood, I'd give him a Tretch Craventail. Perfectly serviceable, fun backstory, but everyone else is a cooler choice. Drycha, Briarmaiden of Woe, has been a lord option in every edition of the Wood Elf Army book, but she's a real dark horse candidate in my opinion. She hates the Wood Elves and is pro-Ancient Tree Spirit. She also hates anyone who has ever looked sideways at a blade of grass, and would likely have fear and terror and just be a boogeyman version of Durthu if implemented. And the fact that Durthu already exists is actually the biggest mark against her. It's possible that the she mentioned in the free LC is Drycha, and that the wording choice of trimmings meant more than just Wood Elves. But I don't see much hype for her. If I had to rate her likelihood, I'd say she's a Gorok. She fills a nice niche, but somebody else already exists that does mostly the same thing. Which puts the Sisters of Twilight as my front runner for the DLC Lord. Though I'll admit, I really want to sick a hawk on someone's eyes as Araloth. I think he'd be kind of fun. It's just a shame that he's not coming as an FLC Lord, because he'd really be perfect for that. There are other super old 4th edition Wood Elf Lords that could be considered, but each is so obscure that using them might cause a riot. But considering that Helmengorst also became a legendary Lord, anything is really possible with CA. Naeth the Prophetess is a discount Ariel. Thalendor is the Wood Elf Tic-Tac-Toe, except on a Great Eagle. Lothlin the Brave, Skaal the Falconer, and Scarlock were all combined together to make Araloth in later editions. Wykewithal the Wild is just so 80s that it hurts. And Gruarth the Beastmaster actually kind of works, but for reasons I'll get to in a minute, and works far better as a new type of unit for the Wood Elves. Whichever Wood Elf they go with though, they will likely start the Vortex campaign in the Southlands, where the Bowmen of Orion currently are now, since they're the only Wood Elves on the entire Vortex map. The DLC's basic story will likely involve the World Routes, which are a series of long routes branching out from the Oak of Ages across the entire Warhammer world. They're sources of immeasurable power, and in the lore, the Skaven are actually already gnawing at them for their own means, trying to tap into their power. The Wood Elves here would likely be trying to restore them, while the Skaven want to cut them off from it and claim them from their own. If I were to design a new system around the world routes for the Wood Elves, I'd actually have them work similarly to the rail system in Shogun 2 Fall of the Samurai, a sort of fast transit system along certain lines, as in the lore, you can actually travel along the world routes. Combine it with the Lizardman's geomantic web system, and you have yourself a workable mechanic that actually provides buffs and a unique playstyle, since the Wood Elves wouldn't be about massive expansion anymore, but instead reconquering key forest points and then traveling back and forth to defend them. Normally, a Warhammer Lord pack also includes a new general type or a new hero and about 4 new units. The problem is that CA already adapted nearly everything in the 8th edition Wood Elf rulebook when they made the first DLC. There's actually not a lot left to pick from. Spellweaver generals are almost guaranteed in this DLC, as I mentioned earlier, as they're one of the few missing and the Wood Elves don't have a caster general. But to help spice them up, they'll likely also get a unicorn mount option, which is already in the game. The missing hero that will be added will either be a Glade Captain if it's Araloth, or Shadow Dancers if it's the Sisters of Twilight. Either way, it'll be a lightly armored, fast melee hero that hits hard. Give either of them a great stag mount option that can also be available to Glade Lords, and then call it a day. For new units for the Wood Elves, though, we'll need to dig a bit deeper. I'm thinking Beastmasters. You can see their models in the very oldest Warhammer books and magazines, but their flavor is still on point. And since Kislev is highly likely in Warhammer 3, it also means CA has a bear model floating around the office ready to go. Beastmasters can also control boars, hounds, or wildcats, and all of them might be included as variants for all I know, but they have that lightly armored, fast, cool factor that the Wood Elves require. Shadow Dancers, or Blade Singers, whichever you want to call them, are my next pick. They're basically upgraded War Dancers, and DLCs always have a unit or two that's basically a reskin with a new weapon, and this one's my vote. They're bigger, they're meaner, and they're covered in even more Pictish-inspired paint, which I can only assume makes them better. Elf Kinsmen, or Kindred. Now, these yet again are pulling from pretty far back in the lore manuals, and they're a low-tier infantry unit that can kind of be used to fill out the Wood Elf roster, and though they're not flashy, if you gave them armor piercing, they would fill a similar role to Rangers from the Warden and the Paunch DLC. But finally, you have to have one big showpiece unit for each side of the DLC, something that when the trailer's playing, it pops up on screen and everyone's like, yeah, I want one of those. And barring pulling from Age of Sigmar or bringing life to one of the Fey units, I think it's going to be a Meadow Chariot. And I know that's an odd choice to be sure, but in the lore, the elves actually patrolled the vast meadows in and around the forest of Athel Loren as well. But this thing doesn't roll between trees or anything like that, and it's pulled by either stags or unicorns or like light horses. You can do some really cool, fun stuff with it. Think Boudica and the ancient Celtic chariots, right? I'll admit I'm not particularly excited about adding another chariot though. Instead, they could add Altar Kindred and Shape Changer. Now, this is another Warhammer 3rd edition unit, but it's very cool stuff. You see, these guys actually swap back and forth between various animal forms. And you could just put it on the spell bar as a single entity unit and click bear or stag or boar and get a bunch of different options. And I just realized that these guys are actually druids from Warcraft 3. And in fact, every night elf unit from Warcraft 3 would be awesome here, since they're nearly all stolen from the Wood Elf roster anyway. There's also the Zoat lizard guys, but frankly, they are so far off brand now and were left way behind in previous editions that I just don't see them coming back at this point. Opposing the Wood Elves is most likely the Skaven, as I mentioned earlier. They're the only Warhammer 2 base race still missing enough units to justify a full DLC. Largely because Clan Moulder, the last of the big 4 Skaven clans, has not yet been added. Moulder specializes in big, monstrous mutations that cost a lot of time and effort to create, so CA really wanted to avoid dumping all their Charlemagnes on this one in one go. But if you get Clan Moulder, you almost certainly have Throt the Unclean as their legendary lord. The most twisted and ingenious master mutator of Clan Moulder, Throt has spent a lifetime working with Warpstone, and now sports a third arm, a bloated and deformed body, and fetching spikes for his trouble with it. But it's also made him one of the 9 Lords of Hellpit, which is almost certainly where he'll start in a Mortal Empires campaign. His campaign mechanic will likely be based around the acquisition and mutating of existing units to fill new roles, creating variants of things like ogres to then put on the battlefield. which in-game would probably play like a combination of Grom's Cauldron and Ikit Claw's Workshop. Also probably get a mechanic based around his ravaging hunger. All Skaven can be consumed by the overwhelming black hunger, but when Throt gets especially hungry, he even eats his own people. So I think CA will probably use this mechanic to keep you in check during the game and keep you from snowballing. Throt's two unique weapons are the Whip of Domination, that reduces leadership on attack, and the Creature Killer, which should get a bonus versus large if they stay true to the books. And if I had to rate his overall likelihood, I'd call him a Vlad von Karstein. It's not a question of if, but when he will be added. And because of White Dwarf Magazine, issue 311, we actually have a Clan Moulder army list that we can draw on to build out the rest of the Moulder army. Mutant Rat Ogres, which have extra limbs, heads, and generally hit harder than the regular ones. Armored Rat Ogres, where they've stapled some metal plates to their skin and generally chunked some metal on the outside of them. And Augmented Rat Ogres, where the best of Clan Moulder technology is combined with the best of Clan Skyer. In the end times, these were actually relabeled as Storm Fiends, but they remain basically the same, armored rat ogres with big warp fire throwers attached to them and huge pinchers. And I realize that's technically 3 units, but since they'd all pretty much be reskins with a bit added here or there, I think that we'll probably see all 3 at once. The next unit I foresee is Giant Rats, a fast-huming beast unit used to attack the flanks, with a regiment of renown likely called Wolf Rats. Though technically this was a separate model on the tabletop, I don't think we'll get a different one here as they do roughly the same thing. The reason though I think we'll see Giant Rats is that they can also be reused as Great Pox rat mounts for Skaven lords, since CA likes their models to pull double duty. And in this case you can reuse the attack animation, run animation, and frankly just slap a saddle on top and now your Skaven lords all have mounts. The final unit though has to be a real showstopper. I mean, this is the final DLC for Warhammer II, theoretically, so it needs to be big. And for me, it's a toss-up between Brood Horrors and the Burrowing Behemoths. Chimerats are also a possibility, but thanks to Chaos Roby's great Chimerat mod, I just don't see CA including them as a paid DLC. I mean, the cat's out of the bag here, and everybody knows that it's just a reskinned Hydra with rat ogre heads and some fur slapped on. So now if they repeat that, they just come across as cheap. Brood Horrors are huge, hairless, and have regeneration. They were added with the Monstrous Arcanum as a new monster unit and as a mount for Skaven warlords. Think of them like upgraded giant rats. They're big, single-entity units and practically could reuse the giant rat animations, similar to how ancient salamanders were a single-unit version of Razordons. Burrowing behemoths, though, are a huge, single-entity, balding monstrosity that was used to dig the tunnels that expand Hell Pit. In combat, they would burst out of the ground and smash anything around them. Think huge, angry, naked mole rat, and it could be very cool to see on the battlefield, though CA has never really figured out what to do with tunneling units. Throt's signature unit, the Throtlings, could also appear, but CA likewise tends to avoid swarm units, and it's much more likely it will appear as a spell of some kind. Add in a Master Mutator General based off Throt himself to buff and boost all these new crazy mutations, and then toss on a Packmaster hero to control all these beasties, and you've got yourself a cracking good DLC with a couple units that really have that wow factor you need in a reveal trailer. I mean, just imagine a bunch of bears running out of the woods that then get attacked by ogres, and then the sisters come down on some eagles and they start fighting stuff, and then suddenly from off to the side, a big giant burrowing thing bursts out of the ground. I'm predicting they're going to do a Tremors reference right here, because Tremors, or possibly Dune, where it's like jumping up out of the ground and snaps at him out of the air, something like that. I mean, hell, we might even get Gorich, Castellan of Hell Pit, to pop up as a unique hero for Throt. He's an augmented rat ogre that had the brain of a Chaos Marauder transplanted into him, because that's the kind of craziness Clan Moulder gets up to, and that's why I'm dubbing it the Mutant and the Maidens. But what do you think? Am I completely off base on this? And will there be another free LC Lord to go with this? Maybe a Dark Elf of some kind, like Talaris Dreadbringer or Rakart the Beastmaster. You know, it's funny, I was actually working on a new what I want to see in future Warhammer DLC series when this new one was announced. So it's been an interesting segue to take that information and bring it here. It's a fun combination of game design, marketing, and deep lore knowledge that is really interesting to share with you. So look for a potential DLC video in the future. And who knows, if CA sees this and the DLC idea really catches on, we might even convince them to create it. But for now, we at least have the Wood Elves to look forward to. And as always, thanks for watching.